Hey guys, Art Decline here, average picker. So I got asked what I thought was kind of an interesting question from a newer picker looking to start picking challenge locks. And they asked for tips in picking challenge locks. And I thought it was interesting because it's not something I've really thought about distinguishing between regular picking and challenge lock picking as far as technique and tips and things like that go. I don't know if I'm the best person qualified to answer this question, but I thought by doing a video on it, I would at least throw this out there too. And then if, maybe somebody's thinking, oh, what can I do a video on? And this will at least give you a topic. So this might be a little choppy as I think this through. There'll probably be some edits and things, but I will try to answer this as best I can, and we'll see what we get. I do want to say I'm going to wrap this whole thing in just kind of a general wrapper, though, and approach it from a newer picker standpoint. So there's going to be exceptions, and there's a lot of differences in general manufactured locks. There's a lot of differences in challenge locks, and there's a lot of differences in pickers. So by the time you mix all that up, you're going to just find this hodgepodge of some locks are really easy for some pickers, and some are more difficult. But in approaching it from a general newer picker point of view, I am going to make some assumptions and generalizations about what locks I'm guessing you have probably picked. Let's put it that way. And so we're just going to approach it from that kind of a standpoint, because otherwise we'd be in here forever deviating and talking about exceptions to the rule and what happens when you move up into an ASA or something. So going to leave it kind of general. If you've already picked some, though, moving into challenge locks, it's not the pinnacle of picking. So it's something you can learn as you go. I know some people like to have kind of, all the information at their disposal before they move into something. They like to learn as much as they can about a topic and then go and try to apply that. And that's fine. But if you already know about picking and you've already picked some locks, you can learn and get better at challenge lock picking as you go. With that in mind, I'm going to say don't rate yourself in relation to what you see from other pickers and from other YouTubers and stuff. And I can give you, even once you get, what you might consider yourself good at it, you can't really rate yourself, because I can show you countless examples where a lock has taken me a long time and some other picker has zipped through it. And conversely, I can show you where I have flown through a lock, a challenge lock in no time, and somebody else has struggled with it. You just can't rate yourself in that relation. More concrete tip-wise, I would say learning variable tension, I think, is probably a little more important on challenge locks in general. There's a lot of cases where you may have to manually rotate back, or you're manually rotating a little bit and you're trying to kind of find that shear line. You're not getting it as distinct. You get a lot more feedback from challenge locks, but sometimes you're just kind of lifting on blind faith and experience that you are pushing that pin up to the right height. In relation to tensioning, I think in general, good fitting tensioners is probably more important in challenge lock picking than in general locks, especially general locks that you might be picking on as a newer picker. I know I can get away with almost any tensioner in a lot of the more common locks and things like that. And a lot of the locks that the challenge locks are built on are cheaper locks. And in their stock configuration, you probably could get away with some really sloppy tensioning. But a good fitting tensioner, because you have to vary and have some more tension control, does seem to be a definite bonus for challenge lock picking. Pick selection, there's a lot of personal preference, I think, in pick selection. For me, though, with challenge locks, I want to use the pick. I don't like switching picks a lot. I want to use the pick that I think is probably going to get me through the most pins. And because you're lifting through a lot of serrations and possibly really sloppy serrations and sloppy undercutting, I want the fattest pick that I can get away with in the lock, even if it's not ideal. I mean, there's a lot of cases where I would prefer a 15 or 20 thousandths pick, but I know I can get in there with the 25, sort of, not ideally, but it's going to give me more lifting power. And as long as I'm willing to spend a little more time kind of finagling the pick in to the lock, it's going to get me the most pins picked. That's not to say you should not switch picks. There are cases where you're going to want to switch picks. I think I actually just had a video one or two back ago where I did a switch and then switched back again, even after declaring I wasn't thinking I was going to. But generally, I want what's going to get me through most of the lock, and then try to deal with it. Deal with the abnormalities perhaps a little bit later. So just to do a little pickup here, a little pickup shot on pick selection, I thought I would just point this out. So this is probably the best example I can think of that I've got in my collection off the top of my head. This is an ICO. It's just, kind of a standard Euro style. I've been told this is sort of the Schlage of Europe. It's nothing too difficult, but it's pretty basic and standard there. Not 100% sure on that. But so I know with this lock, what I probably want is something in 15 thousandths. And this is just a 15 thousandth Sparrow short hook. And this is going to get me in there really well. And I can pick this lock. Now, I also happen to know that this 20 thousandth Sparrow, just from experimentation, will absolutely eat this thing alive. I pretty much just have to kind of, and it's open. If this came in as a challenge lock, however, I also happen to know, that's the wrong one. I also happen to know that I can get in there with the 25 thousandths Tron. It is not ideal. See if I can, but it will get in there kind of well enough to get to the pins. So if this came in as a challenge lock, I am probably going to immediately dismiss the 15 thousandths Sparrow short hook, which is an awesome pick, but it does feel like it's held together with an infant's neck. I'm probably going to dismiss that one, and my choice is going to come down to one of these two, right? And what I'm likely to do is to go with this one in 20 thousandths, even though I want the extra lifting power of the 25. I know this one chews through it so well. This is probably what I'm going to try to start with and see where that gets me. And if I feel like I'm to the point where I'm going to damage the pick real badly or bend it or do something, I'll switch to this one and just work it in there much more carefully and see what I can get as far as lifting power goes. But that's the most immediate example that I could think of. So I just wanted to add that in real quick because it seemed like I had the time to. I personally do not worry about oversetting pins on a challenge lock as much as I do on picking a standard manufactured lock. The reason for that is because challenge lock pins are crazy. They're all over the place. So a lot of times, unless you have a really, really deep overset, chances are you are going to hit some other pin and it is going to just drop the other one back down. Whatever it is you think you've overset, you can try to manually drop it, but odds are if you're still getting binders in that lock, you're going to drop that overset at some point in the process. So I tend to not worry about overset as much. I try to make a mental note, I've overset 2, and I just try to make sure I come back and check it, especially if I've heard a couple clicks from the lock. Then I think, okay, maybe I set 1, or I at least set up a serration, 1 serration up, and that other click may be that pin that I was concerned about dropping back down. So I think you could say, don't worry about oversets quite as much. So on that note, too, though, because the pins are all sort of crazy in a challenge lock, there's not necessarily a distinct binding order where you can just feel which one's kind of the one that's wanting to bind the most. A lot of times in challenge locks, you will find yourself having choices on what to push up. Especially because a lot of them do have serrations and stuff in it. It doesn't really matter which one you're pushing on. You could push on 2 and get it up 2 clicks in a serration, and you can go back and do pin 4 and get it up 3 clicks, and you've still not set either one. So if you want to go back to 2, that's fine. If you want to go and keep working on 4, that's typically fine too. You're going to end up with choices. On that note of choices, though, that can make it a little difficult sometimes in deciding what to do. I don't look for the pin that's binding the most. I look for the pin that's giving me the most feedback through the core. So in a standard lock, I might say, oh, that one's definitely binding the most, even if it's not giving me any kind of counter rotation or anything. That's the one I'm going to probably work on. In a challenge lock, and again, it's because of a lot of the serrations and the undercuts and just the weird pin shapes. Just because a pin is bound, it doesn't mean it's bound in a way that it's interacting with the shear line or the driver. The driver could well be set, and your key pin is still kind of reading through the pick as bound. So what I do is I just kind of bounce a lot, just kind of do a repeated little tapping, I call it jogging, on the pins, and I look for what's giving me kind of the most vibration or the most wanting to counter rotate or do something through the core, and that's usually then the pin that I choose to work on. And I think that might be all I have for you. I guess my final piece of advice would just be, at the end of the day, it's a lock. Don't overthink it. You know the basics of picking, and they still apply. So don't start getting weird ideas because it's a challenge lock. There may be cases where you have to try something weird or do something weird, but at the end of the day, it is just a lock. So yeah, you know the basics, and when all else fails, go back to those basics. Apply your basic tensioning techniques. Just get in there with a basic pick that you're most comfortable with using, and don't overthink it. Just try it as a lock in general, and you'd probably be surprised that that's going to get you further than overthinking it and getting hung up on whatever trickery you think might be occurring inside the lock. And that can be hard. I mean, there's some really good builders out there, and I guess just even their names can be sort of intimidating. And you can sit there with a lock and think, oh my God, this is called Ultra Hard, and it's by this really well-known picker. Oh my goodness, it's probably got craziness going on in it. And it might, but at the end of the day, I promise you, falling back to basic techniques is going to get you further than trying to out-clever and outthink whatever it is you think the builder of that challenge lock did to it. I think that's probably my last piece of advice for picking challenge locks. Anyway, I thought it was an interesting question. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you're looking to get into challenge locks or whatever, by all means do it. It's not as intimidating as the name sounds. Go for it. Maybe you'll like it, maybe you won't. Yeah, so there we go. Hope that got you somewhere. All right, you guys have a good one.